thinking about that notion of balance, transparency, brings us on, I think, to equity. Your recent blog post, Gender Equal, really picks up on this, and we were touching on it at the start of our conversation. Um, where do you sit at the moment in terms of paying for contribution in a way that recognises the need to be fair and reasonable, not just in terms of gender, but any protected characteristic? It's a challenge, let's face it. Again, we come back to the issues around subjectivity versus trying to over measure so that you can think about it holistically. But how's your thinking? I mean, I know it's evolved a lot. You kindly co-authored the chapter for the Routledge book talking about gender-related issues. But say, pulling the lens back, thinking about fair pay, paying for contribution fairly, where's your thinking evolved to?
Specifically on the gender pay gaps, I'm yeah, I'm not quite at the pulling my hair out stage, but because I haven't got much left to pull out. But I just think now we know enough about what you've got to do to close those gaps, that I just don't think there's any excuse for organisations that continue to sit on these gaps. Actually, I mean, to be honest, I think they've just got to put a bit more money behind it, some of them. So just on that dimension of it, I haven't got a lot of patience. But I think on the kind of paying for contribution and studies, a whole range of studies at the time we produced that book saying that there was some good evidence from some big employers at the time that these approaches of individual performance related pay were discriminating against women, often through the mechanism of part-time working. So they didn't have the opportunity really to show the sort of results levels that male full-time workaholics were able to do. But I think it's more central to employers now, I think, to look at that stuff. Most of them have got better data to enable them to look at it. And funny enough, just an anecdote on it, I'm the independent member on the HR committee of, I won't say which one, but a London-based part of London University. And they've reformed their pay structure largely through recruitment and retention issues to, as you'll know, Steve, the higher ed, they've still got service increments, one of the few sectors with service increments left. And what they've done is they've put additional increments on the top, so your pay can go higher, but that's only on the basis of performance appraisal. When that first came in, being who they are, they analysed the stats, and there was some quite serious discrepancies, both on a gender and a race, ethnicity basis, and that basically white men were getting higher assessments and therefore progressing to higher pay. They worked on that over the next 3 years, and interestingly, they know I never supported the introduction of the system. And don't like it in academia generally, but they've got rid of the bias, and I've got to give them that. They've done a lot of work with their their line managers, but it's kind of usually part-time management, isn't it, in a university? But even so, they've done a lot of work on how to improve that. And it's whether or not you still like it, but it's not any longer biased. So I think, again, it can be addressed there. But I think it is whether that of those three bubbles I was saying, performance, the market, and kind of internal considerations, as that internal consideration bubble has been pushed back up, I think that's a really interesting one in terms of whether it puts further pressure on people who've kept individual performance-related progression in the UK. Because I think in North America, my experience has been although I'm doing less work over there now than I was doing then. They've pretty much said just leave base pay as the kind of market or whatever, and reflect contribution in variable pay. And so there, I tend to find that the debate is more about why are you emphasizing individual bonuses so much rather than collective? Why are you incentivizing and not doing anything on reward recognition? Whereas here, I think the base pay is still where a lot of the debate is. Don't know if that matches your sense, Steve.
It does, and we come back therefore to this whole idea of things being transportable between different contexts. Even in the westernized English-speaking world, we've got those differences. I wonder how the debate takes us into the discussion around total reward, because we've talked about the emphasis on base, we talked about variable and contribution. If we're thinking about things then more holistically, more democratically, thinking about equity and fairness, does that notion of total reward, is there a risk that it becomes a bit too generalized and you lose your bearings? Or do you think getting people to think about that notion of total reward, is that what puts the emphasis on, yeah, we need to think holistically about these things?
Yeah, it's a great question. I must admit, at the moment, the organisations I'm working with, we're moving away from using the term, really. It's just got so kind of means nothing, I find. And with COVID, cost of living crisis driving back really the importance of people. One of the most popular areas on the CIPD website now is in work poverty that they developed with Joseph Rowntree. I could 25 years ago, could you have imagined that? You would have an area, even have an area, never mind one of the most popular areas on the CIPD's website for in-work poverty. So I think that the importance of the pay component, and I think where it was total reward was quite badly used, was in some lower paying sectors as a bit of a sort of cover it for low pay. I think that's been totally exposed. And even in some other sectors, I think it was, during the 2010s, if you look what happened in large parts of the public sector, benefits packages were, there was a cost reduction exercise under a terminology of total reward and personalisation and choice of reward. Actually, they took out 50% of the cost of the pension plan, and these new individual benefits no way covered that. And just things like sick pay eligibility, and they were just chipped away at throughout the 2010s, and then the first global pandemic, well, I guess there was the 1917 one, but broadly for 400 years hits, and you think, well, do you know what? Actually, cutting pension and sick pay maybe ain't such a smart strategy. So I don't mind total reward. I quite like terms like well-being. A couple of American folk I know, I see they've got reward and well-being now, rather than total reward or well-being on its own. I quite like that, again, if it reflects the action of what they're actually doing. I just think, I don't know about you, it just became a term that was just used unthinkingly at best, and in some cases deliberately as a cover to take costs out of the package.
And that's the point, as you say. What we're trying to do is to encourage people to be thinking. You remember the CIPD slogan at once says about the thinking performer, thinking professional. Well, if the people are being thought less, that's going absolutely into reverse. Which is a good point as we start to wrap up our really interesting dialogue. thinking about the kind of folks that are looking maybe at these little YouTube videos that are reading, whether it's the reward management handbook that you and Michael continue so successfully to produce, or our reward management text for the CIPD. Thinking about the aspirant reward professional, the people who've got their 25 years to look out to, any thoughts, any things that you might suggest they should be thinking about to help them to be successful?
It's a great question, because I almost find I'm pulled two ways on this. I still hear from HR leaders sort of my age, or there aren't the people coming into the profession, we're not getting the level of skill, etc. And yet on the HR masters classes that I teach, which unfortunately seem to have gone more, I can understand the university's marketing to new psychology graduates, but you tend to get less experienced folk on them in the programs that I'm teaching on anyway. Bright as heck, but they've got less experience. I think very clever, and they, in my sense, they kind of read and absorb knowledge more, actually, to some extent, even if the forms are different from when you and I did CIPD. But I think, they know it's getting the experience and always thinking about how is this going to work. You know, if I'm doing a total reward review at the moment, I get their internal comms people on the project steering group right away. So we're thinking about that. I get line management elements in there, maybe get hold of the HR business partners meetings, and make sure they're aware of it and that we can get their input throughout the project before we change anything. And so I think it's that, I think that element of thinking about how it's actually going to work right at the start, I think is really important. And the other one is just to kick at some of the tires, because I think while all the AI stuff, etc., while technology has I think enabled a lot of folk to move more onto a kind of thinking agenda, and a more strategic agenda. And again, I think COVID really helped with that. I saw one US survey, I think, that was saying workforce issues now get 3 times the focus at board level that they did before COVID. Which you can either say, well, it just shows how appalling the discussion on people was beforehand, but I kind of take that positively. So yeah, I think that strategic awareness of it is higher, and really I think the door is more open to young folk now, as they progress their careers, to really have that influence. With the sort of knowledge that folks like you are providing, I think they're really open to those ideas. It's landing some of them, I think, that probably is still the challenge.
Thank you for that. I think that's really excellent to reflect on it. As we wrap up, final question, bit trite perhaps, but you spoke earlier on about Ed Lawler. You remember Ed used to work with a couple of consultants, Zingheim and Schuster, or Schuster and Zingheim, depending on which book it was, which edition.
I've got, Pay People Right, I've got somewhere.
I was just going to say, so pay people right. So do you think that slogan, is that still pay people right? That was the way in which they were summing it up. There's a lot in there, potentially a lot that could mislead as well as potentially take people in the right direction. But do you think paying for contribution is about pay people right?
I guess I kind of associate pay people right with you could either call it a more confident assertion or a more rigid assertion that there is a best way. And I can't, it was from the kind of Jack Welch kick behind's era of leadership, which it suited quite well. And, blimey, we've got, an American presidential candidate who seems to adhere still to that philosophy very strongly at the moment. So it's still around there. But nonetheless, I think if I look at leadership generally and leadership development, I think the recognition of the complexity of the leadership agenda, the dangers of just pursuing a total shareholder return and the stakeholder shareholder rather than a stakeholder model. Even the stupidest leader, most shareholder focus, would recognise with a Labour government getting in that they're going to get more influence from government and more requirements beyond just ethnicity and disability reporting, which we should have had decades ago. But anyway, better late than never. And so I think that sort of breadth. I've forgotten the thinking performer. The thinking reward professional, I think, is it's their time really now. I think people recognise there aren't simple solutions. There's probably always some options. The phasing and piloting. I'm actually seeing people pilot stuff seriously, probably for the first time in my career. So I think I'm surprised, despite the gender pay gap, I said the gender pay gap at the start, I'm surprisingly optimistic for an old pessimist like me.
It's good to see some optimism coming through. The strap line, you've made me think the strap line for Sarah and my book for the CIPD is alternatives, consequences and contexts. We wanted people to think strategically. You've got alternatives, think it through in terms of the consequences. You can either go out and test it, or you can come up with some hypotheses and build evidence around it. But context is crucial. As you rightly say, it's not the one size fits all. You've got to think about something that is going to feel right, and indeed people can actually get their arms around and manage effectively. So I think we're on the same page there. Brilliant. Duncan, thanks ever so much. Really appreciate your time as always.
Thank you, Steve. And just to say, thanks for involving me in this sort of media and looking at the videos you've put together already for your book. I just think they're fabulous. You're the kind of I don't know, the David Hockney of the reward world and it's brilliant to get at people, different audiences, and get these important messages across.
Thank you for saying that. Really appreciated. You definitely ooze charm. Thank you again.
Thanks, Steve. Cheers.